you sharing your knowledge with us. So first of all, I would like you for you to introduce yourself a bit. I know that most of you are in this business, but please do.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm Gordon Strong. I'm the president of the BJCP. I've been a home brewer for more than 25 years. I've written a couple of books on home brewing. I do the style guidelines for the BJCP. I write articles in several brewing magazines. And when we're not in quarantine, I love to visit South America and other places around the world.
Great. So we'd like to share with you, this is our 19th week of interviews, given the COVID-19 crisis. And we're really happy because we've received a great response from people. This time, the interview is going to be, first, we have some questions that were in ACA's, were compiled from ACA's Instagram. And so we're going to start with that. And then the last half hour of the interview, the rest of the questions are going to be compiled from the chat. So there are going to be questions that are going to be brought up as we speak, and that will be it. The idea is to go in a structure. When we're going to start with supplies, how do you and their usage, both for beer and meat, and the first question we have is, because what did you study? You're an engineer, right?
I'm a computer scientist.
Yeah, computer scientist. Cool. So the first question is, how does a computer scientist arrive to the world of beer?
Oh, well, I like to drink beer. And as somebody with a technical background, I like making things. So, it's the kind of hobby that often attracts people who are in engineering and the sciences. So I like to cook and I like to drink. So I like making things. This is a good thing to make.
Great. How are your beginnings in the brewing world? How did you learn to make beer?
Oh, this was in the early 1990s. Some friends of mine from college. This was after we were graduated for many years, but some friends of mine had made homebrew, and I thought they did a good job, and that showed me that it was easy. So friends helped me, and at that time there weren't many books. There was Charlie Papazian book and some other American homebrewers at the time. So there wasn't much, but I would read about the technical process to understand what I was trying to accomplish, and then just started making things. So there was a lot of experimentation back in those days.
Great. So Charlie Papazian, the Charlie Papazian book, one of the main texts that you read when you were beginning, right?
I read it once, and then I went to some more advanced books pretty quickly. Dave Miller and Greg Noonan were some of the authors at the time that had good books. And understand that as an American, new homebrewers at the time were making beers with extract. So I did that for 2 years before learning all grain. And then, I pretty much haven't made extract beer since then. But a lot of Americans will start out making extract beers. I know you don't have malt extract available, so all of you pretty much start out as advanced brewers.
Great. So, how did you arrive to BJCP, and how long have you been participating in?
I took my BJCP exam in 1997, so I had been homebrewing a couple of years before I did that. But it was through my homebrew club. People there, we would have competitions, and other clubs would have competitions, and I just started asking questions about how this works. Who are these judges? What makes them special? And then I learned, they're just like the rest of us. It's just they took a test. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm good at tests. So tell me about that. So I started by going to competitions. Started out by stewarding and talking to people, and then took the exam. And it's 300 competitions later. Here I am.
Cool. It's quite a career in the BJCP. In that way, what's the next question is, what's your main motivation to represent the Mid-Atlantic zone, and what plans or communication do you usually realize with the judges in your area?
Can you repeat the question, please? You broke up.
Okay, no, don't worry. The question is, what's your main motivation to represent the Mid-Atlantic zone, and what plans or communication do you usually have with the judges in your area?
Oh, okay, with the BJCP, yeah. Well, the BJCP is broken up into regions, and I had traveled around to different places, entering competitions and judging, and I would meet people, and they would invite me to come to their competition, and I was interested in doing that as much as possible. So I met a lot of people in the area before I decided to run as a BJCP officer. But I had been involved with the BJCP as a member, and I had volunteered on a number of things for a while, so I knew a lot of the people. So I just had kind of met people over the years before I decided to run.
Cool. Could you tell us about a bit about how's the internal, how the BJCP works in a way, and how do you got to become president?
Yeah, it's an organization that doesn't have offices. We do our business online, so we send emails and things like that to discuss what we want to do. And over the last 15 years or so, we've been trying to hold meetings at like our national conferences where a lot of us would get together. But the organization was set up by the time I joined. So I took over something that was already running. They had a competition program and an exam program, and all those things were already going. So Most of us just we coordinate by email. Sometimes we have phone calls. Nowadays, when we can get our technology working, we do meetings like this.
Yes.
But you know, there's always some problem. So I much prefer to meet in person. But now we're a bigger organization, more worldwide. So that's a little harder.
Yeah, I get it. For many of us, the BJCP style guide is our main connection to the organization, even for people that are not in the judging business. But so it will be really interesting, I think, for people that are hearing us, if you could tell us a bit about how the process of the making of this guide, how the work was done, where did you look up for this information, and how many people participated in the creation of the guide?
I've been involved in a couple of the editions starting in 2004. So I don't know what happened before 2004. I knew we had guidelines, and I had a number of questions and ideas about the existing styles. So I don't really know how they were put together, but I worked on trying to expand styles to describe beers that were being entered in competitions, and also to try to have more of a standard description format for how we described styles. Because the idea was that if we could teach people the method for how to judge, then if you have the style guidelines and you've never tasted the style before, you should be able to do an okay job judging that beer in a competition, given just the description. So that's what I tried to do. When we did the 2004 guidelines, there was a group of 6 or 8 people, and we did it all via email. But early on, a lot of the people just kind of decided that they liked how I wrote the style description, so they worked on research, but I did all the writing. And I've been kind of doing most of the writing since then. Sometimes people will write up a first draft, but I almost always will edit it and to try to make it more complete and fitting in the styles, so that if you read through the styles, it sounds like one person wrote them. So we went through kind of a big update in 2015, and we had a lot of people working on that one. Some had bigger roles than others, but kind of divided up the work into people that would be reviewing existing styles, people who would look at new styles, people that would check the commercial examples, people that would check the numbers, those kind of things. So we divided up that work, and then I also had a separate team who would do the review, that would go through and kind of try to fact check it and see if we were missing anything, if we actually were following the goals that we had set for ourselves. So we're currently working on an update. Hopefully it'll be done this year, and that'll be more like the 2008 update, which was a small revision. We don't like to do a major change to the guidelines too often, because it impacts our exams and people that are doing education and translations and those kind of things. So it's a fairly small group this time, maybe 10 or 12 people.
Great. Thank you for sharing that with us. Would you tell us about your relationship with meat? How long have you been brewing it? Which benefits do you find in being a beer brewer and a meat brewer at the same time?
Oh, I've been making mead almost as long as I've been making beer. So late 1990s is probably when I made mead for the first time. I don't know. It's I always liked drinking mead. I thought it was both easier and harder. It takes more time to have it be finished, but it often doesn't take as long. It's not as difficult to actually brew it. It's more expensive to get the ingredients. But I kind of liked mead because I felt like I could make it taste the way I wanted fairly easily. I would be able to adjust the flavor of the finished mead by adjusting the sweetness or the acidity or adding things to it. And the techniques that I developed for working with mead, I actually started applying to beer, and that was probably one of the innovative things that I did was to think of making beer the same way, in that when I got a finished beer, if it wasn't exactly what I wanted, I knew how to adjust it slightly to make it closer to what I wanted to get. And that's kind of when I had good successes in entering big competitions. It was, if I would take the time, I would know what judges were looking for, and I would make sure that my beers would give that experience to the judges. So knowing just how to make the final small changes to give you the extra few points. It's not going to make a bad beer good, but it gives you a little advantage, I think, to be a judge when you're making your beer, because you know how judges will evaluate it.
Get it? It's great. I've just started making meat myself. It's really interesting. It's a bit different from beer, but I think that there's a lot to learn there.
Well, save me some.
For every brewer. Yeah, sure.
I want to try it.
Yeah. Once you get down here, for sure.
Yeah, once I get back.
Yeah. So we have a last question about you and your work before we start with the subject of today. That's the use of local ingredients. So maybe if you could tell us a bit about your work as a technical editor for brewing books, and also as an author from some of them.
Yeah, I was the technical editor for two books, Radical Brewing by Randy Mosher and Wild Brews by Jeff Sparrow. Those are both guys from Chicago, which is about 5 or 6 hour drive from where I live. But it's close enough that I knew both of them. The publisher asked me if I could review the books, so I worked with them on that. I had proposed writing some books before then, but at that point, people didn't know who I was enough to want to have me write a book. It wasn't until I had some success at big competitions where, I mean, after I won the Ninkasi Award the second time, the publisher says, you can write about whatever you want. We just want you to write about a book now. So,
Okay.
so I did. So, you know, having some success there, because they want books by people who have, you know, can speak with some credibility on a subject. So, you know, if they had somebody who had won big competitions, then that was appealing to them. So I don't know if how I got to be the technical editor. Nobody ever told me the story, but I did know both the people who asked me, so they might have had you know, an
Some
opinion
say
there, or made a recommendation. But the books that I was writing was after I had won things. But I've also been writing for magazines this whole time. So I've been doing a lot of magazine writing for a while, and I've been doing this style column in Brew Your Own magazine.
It's a great magazine.
So that gives me a chance to go deeper into some of the styles and write more about them than I would put in the guidelines. I can put more of the story behind the styles. So I mean, I'm actually working on this computer you can't see over there. I'm working on the next story, which is Flanders Red Ale. So
Great.
when we get done, I'm gonna I'll probably have a Rodenbach and you know, finish writing.
Gets inspired.
Yeah.
So great. Thank you for sharing all of that with us. Now let's get into the subject of today. That is the use of local ingredients in brewing of beer and mead. There's a lot of talking about Latin American identity and the use of local ingredients. How do you feel about that? Do you think that there's an Latin American identity brewing wise, or it's in the works, or maybe we should? How do you see that from your travels down here?
Yeah, I'm actually writing a story for Brew Your Own at the moment. After I get done with the Flanders Red Ale, I'm going to write about that, but about some of the experiences I've had in Brazil. But it made me think about the question that you asked, because I hear that a lot when I give a talk on any subject in Latin America, that people will ask me about you know, what's our identity. You shouldn't ask me. You should work on it and, you know, then show me. But I think you know, I've done some collaboration brews with people down there, and I try to use local ingredients where possible. I mean, I've given talks on this, but craft beer is craft beer all around the world. For countries that don't have a brewing heritage, a brewing tradition, I see a lot of countries basically brewing what amounts to American style beer, or what it used to be before everybody started making hazy IPA and seltzer. It's actually hard to find beer in a lot of bars in the U.S. now. Well, most of them are closed now, but I think being able to use a local ingredient well helps give an identity. I've seen that in competitions. The last competition I went to before the lockdown was in Blumenau in Brazil. The oh, there's some word for it in Portuguese, but CBC is the acronym.
Yeah.
The enormous commercial beer competition, and I saw how some of the international judges responded to beers with local ingredients. I also saw this the last time we had the big competition in Chile when we were in Valparaiso. Beers like Brazilian beers that were aged on some of their wood have a very unique character, and if people haven't tasted it before, they're very impressed by it. So I have tasted it before, so I didn't think those beers should necessarily have won, but they very much impressed the people that were tasting it for the first time. Beers that were like aged on the wood, Amburana.
Amburana,
yeah. So that's an example. I've also worked with some of the Brazilians when they were putting together their Catarina sour style, and you know, the way it showcases the fresh fruit from there, I think is also a good example. But even if you have ingredients that are relatively common in other countries, if it's still a product that is associated with your country or your area, I would still feature it. You know, certainly I've had beers in Brazil that have coffee in them, for instance. You know, a lot of places have coffee, but you know, they could say, "Hey, it's from here." Sure, that's great. That counts. It doesn't make it as unique, perhaps, but it does, you know, give you a taste of the local area.
Great. And we. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, it's a little better now.
Yeah, sorry. Maybe.
Go ahead.
I was saying that when many brewers start, they all make there is one right with things. How, but there's
José María, no te está escuchando bien. Gordon, let me take that question.
yes.
Okay.
When you use, for example, elements that are not really traditional, as fruits or spices, what do you think, or what do you recommend with the risks of contamination and unbalanced when you use that kind of stuff?
Well, the contamination, if you'll treat the fruits and spices differently. I mean, when I work with fruit in the US, I usually, especially like in mead, I'll freeze it first and then thaw it. But mostly that's just to help break up the cell walls in the fruit to make the juice more available. If I'm using spices, I'll often add those at the end of the boil. It's kind of like making tea. You know, I tend to limit the contact time because I'm always afraid that I get too much tannin out of the spices, and that'll make the beer astringent. So I tend to just steep them for, I don't know, 2 to 5 minutes in a bag, and dip, 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 and pull them out. I don't like adding spices to the secondary because it tends to extract more of the harsh character from the spices. Some spices, the character is extracted by water. Sometimes the character is extracted by alcohol. So I tend to use the spices where you can actually use water to get them out. So I put them in at the end of the boil, and that handles any contamination problem. Fruit is harder to work with. One of the things that I actually like to do when I'm working with fruit is I actually put the fruit in a mead and make the mead, and then blend some of the mead back with the beer. You probably can't call it, just beer at that point, but sometimes I use that as a way to add the fruit flavor back in. So either freezing the fruit and thawing it, or some other process. Usually when I make mead with fruit, I'm doing fruit in the primary fermentation. So the natural fermentation process usually handles the bacterial load. But once the beer is finished, and the pH is down and the alcohol is up, then it's easier to add fruit in. And sometimes if I want some fresh fruit character, I have a machine we call a juicer. I don't know if it's the same word and how that translates into Spanish. It's you put the fruit in, and it separates the juice from all the solid parts, and you just keep the juice, and then mix that in towards the end. But when you're using fruits and spices, you have to be careful about balancing the acidity and the tannin, and that's where making mead or wine is sort of handy, because you think about those things and how the sweetness level is supportive. But you have to think about those balances, and not be afraid to adjust it at the end as well, until it has the flavor you want. I see a question in the chat. Do you want me to do those too, or do you still want to ask me?
Those are can you hear me now, Gordon?
I can. Sorry, my phone.
No, we have.
My phone thought I said Siri or something, so it's talking to me.
It's okay. No, the questions in the chat are for last. The next question we have is, what recommendation would you give us in order to inspire, brewers regarding the use of fruit and possible combinations of the base styles and aroma and flavor of any honey in specifics?
Yeah, that's kind of the work that you have to do. I mean, you have to taste the ingredients, and you have to have enough familiarity with cooking to know what flavors go together. So what I try to do is I taste them, and then I try to imagine those flavors together. So whether you can do that or not, I mean, you have to, if you have some experience doing that in cooking, you think about that all the time. You look at what ingredients you have in the refrigerator, and you just cook rather than following a recipe. You just say these flavors are compatible. You kind of have to learn that with experience. But I do think about not only the flavors that the ingredients carry, but what do they bring as side effects. You know, what is the acid they bring? Do they bring tannin? Because I'd have to account for those in the balance. And you know, don't be afraid of getting it wrong the first time. I mean, if you've got something that's a good idea and the flavors are compatible, yeah, you may have to work at it to get the balance right. And even if you're following a recipe, this is something that, okay, so I'll give you an example with cooking. It's
Great.
it's the middle of summer here in the U.S., so we're getting fresh tomatoes. You know, they're delicious. You know, they're people are growing them right here, so they're not like the ones with no flavor that you get in the winter. They're the good ones you get in the summer, and they're local. So if you're making a recipe, you know, the recipe might not have been written for what is it like if you have fresh tomatoes. It might be whether you have canned tomatoes or you have you know, some other form. And you know, the recipes will often say, well, you might have to add a little salt or you might have to add a little sugar. You know, you're trying to compensate for how ripe are they. So when you're dealing with an agricultural product, you have to understand that the freshness will vary, and you have to be able to evaluate what do you actually have now. Even if you have somebody else's recipe that you like and it works, you probably don't have their exact ingredients. So you have to learn to taste them and balance them and be willing to adjust them at the end. But you can come up with good ideas just by tasting the flavors and saying, how compatible is that? Just food pairing principles, basically. You know, if something is a very powerful flavor, it'll overpower delicate flavors. So if you put them together,
for a minute.
Okay, you might not. If you have something with a powerful flavor, it'll cover up the flavor of something delicate. So you have to be careful with how it's used. I mentioned the umbrana wood. It's a very strong wood. If you use that in, you know, it makes sense to use it in an imperial stout. I'm not sure it makes sense to use it in a kolsch.
Yeah, that connects with the next question is, do you have any sort of general guideline of what type of beers go well with some kind of fruit, or like pale beers go well with this sort of fruit, or or darker beers go well and like that?
Yeah, but they're just general guidelines. It's kind of saying like you drink white wine with fish, you know,
yeah.
except when you don't. If you've got a nice salmon, red wine is often very nice with it. So you know, the rules are meant to be broken, but you're trying to find a compatible blend. So sometimes I look for are there flavors in the beer style that the ingredients have. I got a medal once with it was a blackberry Baltic porter. So think about that. I mean, a Baltic porter often has these dark, fruity flavors. So I'm taking one of those and enhancing it a little. So, you know, I'm going with sort of a natural pairing. You know, you also can think about flavors from foods that you've had. Like if you're trying to use a fruit flavor with chocolate, think about when you buy chocolates, sometimes they have fruit in them. What kind of fruit do they have? You know, do they have like cherries or oranges, things like that, raspberries? You know, those are known to work. So you can take things you know from another experience, not necessarily with beer, could be with food or something else, and you could apply that to beer by taking a sort of a known combination that works and trying it. But in general, I would say be aware of how strong, how intense the ingredient is, and try to not have the ingredient totally dominate the base beer. You're looking for something that's a pleasant combination. If you're in Chile, you might like merquén, but if you put like a kilo of that in your stew, I mean, what else are you going to taste besides smoke and heat? So you'd like to taste the meat too, right? So you have to be able to balance those ingredients, and maybe you do a little experiment and see how well do those work. But so I look for either flavors that are already present in the beer, or flavors that are complements that you know of from other ingredients. That's where I would start. I mean, get some experience with something before trying something really crazy. A lot of people think, oh yeah, if I just mix all these ingredients, it'll be great. Think about like if you're painting or something. Yeah. It's like, wouldn't it be great if I used all the colors? Well, it's a good way if you want everything just to be brown, but you have to have some finesse, some subtlety, some intention when you combine those.
In your own experiments, have you ever tried one combination that's not good at all? Maybe.
Oh, I've tried lots of combinations that are horrible.
For sure.
Well, sometimes and if you're a beer judge and you're writing about something like that, I try to distinguish between, okay, you made a really good beer, you just made some bad choices of ingredients, because then it's not like just saying, well, I hate this beer. I mean, I may hate the beer, but I could see it's well brewed. I just don't like the combination. And sometimes those are things like basic clashes of flavor. If you get like a beer that's both bitter and sour at the same time, especially if there's no sweetness to balance that, they both kind of enhance each other, and it makes it just, that flavor to me just tastes like old coffee. It's been sitting around so long, it's just harsh and acidic. So it has to taste good in the mouth. So you have to look for that. So I don't know. There's probably some. This is a question I wish I would have had in advance so I could think about it, because if I have a bad beer, usually I try to forget about it. So yeah, asking me to remember a bad tasting experience, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you already talked about your use of frozen fruit, but have you ever like make a split batch and use fresh fruit and frozen fruit, and or maybe one batch next to the other, and have you detect any differences?
Oh, well, maybe not side by side, but well, the example I have, I'll give you the example with the Catarina sours from Brazil. Some people pasteurize them. Some commercial producers pasteurize them, and some don't. And I can taste the difference. I mean, the fruit tastes cooked, and that's not the flavor I want. It's kind of the difference between eating fresh fruit and eating like jam. It's not the same. And when I say I work with frozen fruit, usually what I'm doing is in something like mead, I'm buying fresh fruit. I'm buying fresh fruit. I wash it. I remove any things. I get rid of all the any that's rotten or just not perfect. Anything I wouldn't want to eat that doesn't look right. I separate those and I wash it, and then I'll just freeze it overnight, and then the next day thaw it and use it. So that just causes the cells to break apart so that all the juice is available. But it's not like, the thing has been frozen for 2 years and I pull it out. But so that's just that's more of a processing method for me than anything else. And I tend to, in a mead, I would tend to use a lot of fruit. So, it's hard to sort of detect any sort of loss of flavor that way because I'm just using it in quantity. But I have tasted that in other beers that have been processed. So like with the Catarina sours, the ones that I've had that I've really liked, it's the people are adding the fresh fruit after fermentation. So the fruit has as little processing as possible. And by that time, the pH of the beer is like below 3.5. So it's not like anything's going to grow in it. It's already sort of, protected at that point. Plus it's delicious, so it's going to go away quickly.
They are great beers, Catarina sours. I would like to go back a little bit about what you just talked about. How do you deal with seeds and stones in fruit? Do you have any particular tool or method to dealing with these?
It depends on the fruit. For some things like cherries, having some of it, you have to be careful because too much of it is kind of poisonous, but a little bit of it can add a little bit extra complexity. But for something like strawberries, if people use a lot of them, and you kind of have to use a lot to get the flavor, they always tasted to me like the little black seeds on the outside, when you eat a fresh strawberry. It when I say it tastes seedy, it tastes like those little black seeds. So that's a case where I had a mead that was really good, and I asked the brewer what was the secret. How did you get that intense strawberry flavor and not that seedy character? And he's the one who told me about using the juicer to extract the juice and leave behind the seeds and the pulp and all that. So, you have to understand what's carrying the color and the flavor and the tannin, and a lot of times those are with the skins. I've worked with blueberries a lot, and blueberries are actually a very acidic and tannic fruit. And if you leave them in contact a lot, so when I make meads that use those, I tend to make them even sweeter because the tannin gives the impression on the palate of dryness. So if you make it too sweet, then the tannin brings it back to where you want it to be, if that makes sense.
No, for sure. Well, the next question says, many times when we ferment fruit, their character changes, and it's not precisely the same aroma or flavor as fresh fruit. How do you handle that and make your meat or your beer able for people to recognize the fruit that was used? Or maybe how would you recommend to communicate this change in the profile of the the character of the fruit?
Yeah. Well, that is something that happens when you ferment fruit. People associate the flavor of fruit with a fresh piece of fruit, and if you take the sugar away, is it really going to taste like that? Probably
Yeah.
not. Wine doesn't taste like grape juice, or at least it shouldn't. If it's good wine, you make good wine down there. You know what I'm talking about. But you wind up with something that's better. But if all you have is the memory you have as a kid of drinking just grape juice, no, it's not going to taste like that at all. Your cider isn't going to taste like fresh cider, but that's part of that is your palate sophistication, trying to recognize those good flavors. But if you want to preserve that fruit flavor so it's obvious, I say is put it in after fermentation is done, blend it in like that as a juice. Because if you do ferment it, I think you get a more interesting product. Or maybe you do both. Maybe you ferment it in and then you adjust it at end with a little bit of fresh fruit so that it's obvious that it's still there, but you get the complexity out of the fermentation. Sometimes when you ferment tropical fruits, in particular, sometimes you get unusual results because the chemicals in tropical fruit are very complex. There's a lot that goes into that character. If you ferment a pineapple, sometimes you can get flavors that remind me of gasoline. So it's very unusual. Some of the results that you can get, sometimes you have to be kind of careful with it. But if you want to preserve the flavor, very fresh fruit, turn it into juice, blend the juice in at the end. But understand, make the beer to start with, knowing that you're going to be adding this juice to it, so that there's something in there to balance that freshness. That because you'll be adding sweetness and acidity and tannin probably. I tend to make spice beers more than I make fruit beers. I tend to make fruit meads a lot more. There, I just use a lot of fruit and I put it in the primary fermenter, and I'll adjust it at the end to get to the sweetness, acidity, tannin level I want. And there's techniques of doing all of those.
Great. In the case of a really acid fruit like strawberry, raspberries, or passion fruit, in which how do you handle the acidity in beer and meat so that the balance doesn't go off way too hard on the acid side?
Well, with let's talk about mead first because it's easier. If you have acid and tannin on one side and sweetness on the other, that's where you form the balance. So if you have something that has a lot of acid and tannin, you can always sweeten the mead with some extra honey to account for that. In beer, it's a little harder. That's where you see a lot of people playing around with these beers that use lactose in it. But to me, that takes the beer away from being beer. It's almost like you're making some kind of cocktail. You're adding lactose, and you're adding fruit juice, and you're adding all this other stuff. I'm like, stop. I just kind of like beer. So I kind of like when somebody does produce a beer that still has the flavor of beer and adds some interesting element of fruit. So yeah, I mean, I tend to do it more as a blending than anything else, because it always seems like it needs adjustment. There are techniques that you can use to sort of neutralize some of the acid in the fruit before you put it in the fermenter. If you add sort of a stronger alkaline substance, a chemical of some sort, to neutralize some of the acid, if you're afraid the fruit is going to make it too acidic, particularly if you put the fruit in the primary, and if the pH is too low, the yeast don't work. I mean, sometimes when I make cider, for instance, the pH could be too low at the start, and I need to raise it a little bit for the yeast to be active. If it gets too much below 3.5, the yeast aren't too happy. Did I lose you? I don't hear you, and you're very still.
Yeah, I believe that the Jose Maria is frozen.
Yeah, there he is.
Sorry, I'm back.
Perfect. Gordon, have you got any experience with flour in beer and mead, and what are your recommendations about it?
Flowers?
Yes.
Like
brewing with flowers.
For example,
for example, what?
Flor de Jamaica, the hibiscus.
Oh, yeah, hibiscus. I haven't used it personally, but I've had that in beer, and it's lovely. It has a nice acidity, and it gives it this beautiful color. Yeah, it's I see it at the. I've got a nice Latino market in town, a nice supermercado, and I go in there because that's where I get all the different varieties of dried chiles, and I get limes that are cheap, and in with the dried 12 different varieties of dried chiles. There's I see they have the hibiscus there, so maybe I will try it. But no, I don't really have experience with it. About the only thing I've seen people use, and this is a long time ago, is I saw them use rose petals, and in a mead, and it was very interesting. I have no idea how to do it. I just had tasted it, and it's kind of beautiful. But yeah, if you're using something like hibiscus, watch the acidity. I've seen other, maybe not flowers. Well, maybe I don't know if they're flowers or leaves. Just sort of dried herb-like things. When I was in Ecuador, they had this herb they would make tea out of, guayusa, and I thought that would be a wonderful thing to make mead from, because it reminded me of chamomile, manzanilla, which is like one of my favorite kinds of tea. So it kind of reminded me of that. Plus, I think it has some caffeine in it, so it's like chamomile tea with caffeine. So I think that would make a nice mead, for instance.
Great.
I had it in beer when I was in Ecuador. It was good.
Great, thanks. Now let's move on to spices. The use of tinctures. I don't know if you use the same word, like this.
Yes.
Alcohol. Yeah. It's really common, and some people use the spices directly into the fermenter. In your experience, which technique has best results, or does it varies from spice to spice? Maybe
it varies from spice to spice, and I mentioned this earlier, that some spices are water soluble and some are alcohol soluble, and depending on which, it kind of makes a difference. But here I'll use another cooking story. If you ever cook Indian food, they're never adding the raw spices at the table. They take the spices and they'll cook them in oil, and the big aroma comes out. If you make tea, you have to infuse them in hot water for a while before all the good substances are there. So the point I'm trying to make is I don't like the flavor of raw spices, because it often has a like dust or dirt kind of a taste to it, and I don't enjoy that. I don't want my beer to taste like dirt. So even some spices. I mean, suppose I was using cumin, comino. Imagine putting that in beer. I mean, it would taste earthy, but because that's what the spice tastes like, even if you do cook it. So I prefer the spices to be cooked, and like I said, I tend to use seeds and leaves and bark of things, so like cinnamon, and when I use those, I'll put those in a little bag and I'll put them in towards the end of the boil, maybe in the last 2 minutes, or maybe I'll just wait till I turn off the fire and the the water is still at boiling temperature, and then I'll just dunk it in there for 5 minutes. I mean, how long would you leave leaves in the cup when you're making tea? I mean, that's about how long I want to leave them in there. If you leave them in too long, you start getting tannin and stuff out. So I like enough that the flavor can taste, that you can actually taste the flavor, but not so much that you're getting these extra character out of it. I tend not to soak spices in alcohol. I mean, although, sometimes I buy that and that's how it comes. Like if I, suppose I'm using vanilla bean.
Yeah.
I'll get an actual vanilla bean. I'll cut it down the middle. I'll scrape out the inside, and I'll take the inside stuff and put that in the, I'll make the tea out of that, or put that at the end of the boil. But suppose I don't have enough vanilla in it after I've done all that. The beer is cooled now. So then I would take the vanilla extract. And I know the vanilla extract is produced with alcohol. So, I would take that and use that to, add some flavor. But if you only use a vanilla extract, the flavor won't really be as complex. It'll seem artificial, and people won't like that. But there are if you go to a store where they have supplies for baking, oftentimes they'll have extracts and oils and things like that. So like sometimes you have like cinnamon oil or orange oil or lemon oil. And if I'm just missing a little bit out of one and I need to adjust a little bit more, sometimes I'll use one of those components, but I wouldn't rely on that for, try to get most of the character naturally. And I tend to use a little bit less spices than I really want, so I can sort of move it, just a slight bump in the right direction at the end. Because if I have too much, I can't really take it out.
You can take it away.
All I can do at that point is age it and hope it reduces over time. Yeah. And it will, but sometimes it takes a long time.
Great. Well, I guess it's hard to get your hands on some Latin American wood, but do you have any like general tips or recommendations toward working with wood?
With what?
Wood?
Wood?
Yeah.
Yeah. In this case, I was kind of relying on some of my Brazilian friends who were, pointing me to places where you can buy some kits that have these little cubes of wood, and asking them about, like, how long do you use these different woods? And he says, well, some are in general, they're talking about using, it varies based on the wood. Like Amburana is very strong, and they have like a Brazilian chestnut, castanheira or something like that, something that's like a chestnut that is more nutty tasting. It's subtle, and you have to use more of it or use it for a longer time. So some of these places that have the different woods, they would just say, try them and see. Usually you're talking about using them for like a matter of months, like 3 to 6 months or something like that, sometimes longer. Sometimes you can actually get barrels. And in that case, you have to be aware of how big the barrel is. Because the surface area of the beer that's touching the wood, it's different if you have like a big barrel like you'd use for wine, or some small homebrewer one that might hold 25 liters or something. Yeah. I've seen some homebrewers in the States try to use that, and the beer always turns out terrible because it's too much wood. So in that case, we have these products that are spirals. They're like the tail of a pig. Do you have that, or do you just have the cubes?
No, mostly chips and cubes. I haven't seen the spirals. They're really pretty.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
No,
we can get them
I haven't
here.
seen it yet.
But I would try to use cubes if you can find them more than the chips. Again, the chips, they have so much surface area, there's not much room for error. You're adding quite a bit, so the effect happens very fast. So it's hard to sort of taste it as you go and see when is it in a good balance, because it's easy to go too far too fast.
Yeah, I get it. Now, give me a second to turn on the lights, please. Great. Going to local ingredients as a source of starch. For example, here in Latin America, we have like sweet potato or cassava. Do you have any experience brewing with that, or with any other?
Yeah, well, I have experience with pumpkin.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And in that case, I'm really not using as much as a source of starch as I am as sugar. We have a variety of pumpkin. Well, we have two varieties, or two general types. We have the large ones. We call those field pumpkins, and then we have the small ones that we call pie pumpkins. And the smaller ones are kind of sweet, so you treat them kind of like you would a hard squash. You roast them in the oven, and there's a lot of sugar already in them, and the sugar kind of caramelizes, and you can use that directly. But if you're using it as a source of starch, then you have to do a little bit of research to to know what kind of starches are in that, because different enzymes will break them down. Don't assume that the enzymes in malt will, break down the, so, you might have to take them through different rest temperatures, or you might have to do something where you're cooking when you're working with raw grain like that, with corn or rice or something like that, you kind of have to pre-boil it, and it's a lot of work. So it takes some effort, but I have I tend to make a pumpkin beer every October. It's harvest time here in the States, and people love those kind of beers at parties. It makes you think of the fall, and that has spices, and that has pumpkins, the flavor. So in that case, I actually use the pumpkin in the boil. I don't really mash it because it's already sugar. So I mean, what would the purpose of a mash be? I mean, you mash because you're trying to create sugar, and if you already have sugar, then what's your point? So I tend to put it in a bag. It doesn't really help that much, but it helps separate it. It's almost like how some people do they use the boil in a bag technique. Except I got all the pumpkin in there. It just kind of helps separate it. Because it's very ugly in the fermenter. It tends to kind of float, and it creates layers, and makes racking the beer very difficult. And I don't want to try to strain it out at the end, because I'm afraid I'll oxidize the beer if I'm doing that. So it's I like how the beer tastes, but it's a very difficult to work with. You have to think about how are you going to separate it.
Yeah, can get messy.
Yeah, but yeah, it's something that I would look into if you use a starchy ingredient like that actually has a flavor that you enjoy. If it's associated with some of your food products, I don't know. Some of the things you mentioned, I don't know that they really taste like much. The Brazilians have their starchy vegetable thing, and I don't know, it's in everything, but I don't know that it really tastes like. It's kind of like the tofu of vegetables. It just doesn't taste like a whole lot.
Yeah,
it's good if you cut it up and you fry it in oil and you put sauce on it. But are you actually tasting the vegetable at that time? But if you've got something that's got flavor in it, I think about in Chile, you've got that the choclo, the large corn.
Yeah.
That's we don't see products like that. So if you roast that so you get some caramelized flavors, I think that would be kind of interesting. Try to produce a beer that makes you think of pastel de choclo, and leave out the meat, but but if it has those kind of flavors, I bet a lot of people would say, "Oh, that's familiar. That's I like that."
Great.
I've used Merken, obviously, and
That's
I love
great.
working with that. But vegetables are hard. So think about whether you're handling it like it's a starch or you're handling like it's sugar, and that usually tells you of what you can do with it. But almost always, like, roasting it helps bring out the flavor. He's frozen again.
No. Yeah, it's frozen. Gordon, this is the next question is a really, for me, it's a really good and interesting question. It's related to the for example, the regional, very, very old fermentates, like chicha de jora, for example, in Peru, like the mudai, that is really similar to the chicha de jora in the south of Chile, and the guarapo in Colombia. What do you think about this kind of ferments? Do you consider them as prehistoric beers or antique beers, or do you have another notion about them?
I don't know. I can't say I had enough of them. I when I was in Temuco, I had some of the things down there, and I didn't really like it. It, as we would say in English, it had an acquired taste. It takes getting used to.
Yeah.
And some of the flavors, remind me of things that are spoiled, of the vegetables, and that takes some getting used to. But I can imagine it would be, if it could be refined a little bit. It could almost be like the lambic of South America. I mean, you're
Sort of.
coming up with something natural, but I don't know that I've had a lot of consistency when I've tasted different ones. I never know what I'm going to taste, but I really don't know enough about it.
And do you think that they can be like a source of inspiration for a brewer?
Oh, definitely. I talk a lot about, what are some food products, or what are some things that you already make with these ingredients, and can you use similar flavors, not literally the same, because maybe you don't like that wild character, or the texture is a little weird, but inspiration, definitely. Get some of those ideas. What's that drink in Chile that you get on the street? They usually have like a strawberry, and then they have this other one that almost looks like
mote con huesillo.
Bubble tea. With
the mote con huesillo.
that.
Like this, like a dried peach with
Yeah.
yes, it's mote con huesillo.
With,
Yes, that's
raw wheat. Yes.
yeah. So that gave me some ideas that, well, so there's raw wheat in it. So, suppose you make a wheat beer and you've got these peaches in it. So you do some sort of peach wheat, and, maybe you call it that, but, you're using the idea, the inspiration, the pairing, more than trying to make a beer that's exactly like, what they give you with the straw and all the stuff floating in it. Which, for an American, anytime there's something other than ice floating in a drink, you always worry. Like, is that supposed to be there? Is that a bug? Is that like some?
What is this?
So, but that's me. But if you're making for, your the people that live there, you yes, draw inspiration from those foods, and if you can take an idea like that and then work on it a little bit, I think that's a great place to start.
Perfect. Jose, please.
Dale. So we have a question that goes. It's about something that I know for firsthand that you like. That's seafood here in Chile, at least.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of variety and weird things that you can find in other places. So,
yes.
What about that?
Victor, help me. He
Right.
stopped.
Yes.
What about?
What about? For example, here we know that the oyster stout, this regional pairing of Ireland exists here at French brewery that is intrinsical made a chorito stout like this dried smoked mussels in the stout, and it worked really good. So, what do you think about this using seafood in your beer?
Yeah, depends on the seafood. What you mentioned sounds good. Puree, not so much.
Yeah, that's a
I
side dish, not in the
don't. I don't want a puree porter.
no pure reporter.
No,
Jose, right
too much.
now.
Too metallic.
No, yeah, there's too much iodine in the
Iodine, right?
It's actually vanadium.
vanadium.
Yeah, for sure.
Interesting.
Yep. I like my heavy metal in my ears, not in my mouth. So, but yeah, I mean that's a great idea. But you know, you have to be careful because seafood flavors can be a little strange. But you know, when you say, you know, they tried it and it worked, that's what you have to do. You have to try a small batch and see if it works, and don't believe in the idea so much. You have to be honest with yourself. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You know, just
Bye bye.
give up. And
Yeah.
plenty of other ideas to try. But I would love to try that. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, it worked really good because the smoke was a hint of smoke in the stout, and it
Hmm.
like give it a little bit of a sweet note with the
Like
and
umami.
sweet and salty
Yeah.
note, and it was
Umami, a little.
yeah really 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 good. One of the last questions. Well, we are going to make the question from the people. There are two of them. That it's what do you think about the gray ales? The first one.
Yeah.
Tell
I
us
could
about.
actually read. I could actually read that in Spanish.
Ah,
So
perfect.
yeah, I've actually been working on my Portuguese. I tell you, it makes Spanish look really easy. It's a very complicated language. Grape ale. That was something we added to the style guideline as you know, as a style from Italy, and I think a lot of people use that as inspiration to say, "Hey, we have grapes here. We could make that."
Exactly.
So I think we might be changing that style in the future so that it's not so Italian. I love it. I did a collaboration in Porto Alegre, Brazil, with a brewery called Quatro Árvores, Four Trees,
Yeah.
and they we did it was a grape ale with this Moscato grape grown in Brazil. It was at the end of the growing season, and that's all we could get. And we paired some very aromatic hops with it, and it turned out great. They've made it several times, I think. So, what do I think of it? I love it. I think it's a very it can be a very refreshing beer. You can make them in white and red or rosé styles. I think the challenge there is deciding what direction you want to go. When we were producing something, we wanted something very bubbly, very sparkling. So we were looking for something that had a lot of aromatics, and the Muscat grape has a lot of aroma, so we chose some hop varieties that also had what we thought would be compatible aromas, and then actually tried it in the brewery. They had a sample of the raw must, the juice, and we had some of the hops there, and I kind of rubbed the hops and sprinkled them in with some of the juice and smelled it before it went into the fermenter, and I'm like, yes, this will work. The aromatics seem compatible. But that was with a white variety. If we were doing something red, then I would start also thinking about, well, do we want to bring in some of the barrel aging? Do we want to add some wood element to it? Because a lot of the red wines you have really have a nice wood character, and almost every country down there I've been to, I've found a red wine that I like. I do like the Malbecs in Argentina. Sorry. I do like Carmenere. I do like Carmenere when I'm in Chile. I like Malbec when I'm in Argentina. I like Tanat when I'm in Uruguay. Just like I have Pisco Sours when I'm visiting you guys, and I have Caipirinhas when I'm in Brazil.
Yeah, same thing.
You can enjoy all of it, but if you're trying to do a grape ale, think about white versus red and what you're trying to do, and then sort of pair the compatible flavors. But it's about understanding the variety of grapes that you're using, the character they have, and if it's red, I mean, I could see maybe doing something with wood or even possibly spices that might enhance that. If you're doing something with white, something with very aromatic hops, and trying for a compatible combination. But that's the fun part, because you have an idea and you experiment, and then you just do it and see how it turns out. But yeah, I like it. And if you're ever in Brazil, the beer is called Abundanza from Quatro Árvores.
We're going to try that. The next question is, in your Brewing Better beer, you have a recipe with brown ale with a chai tea. Have you ever used this tea in another style or just brown?
Just brown, but I wanted to. This is a common mistake that some people make if they think it's chai tea. It's the spices used in chai tea. There's no actual tea in it. Sometimes somebody made this beer and they went out and bought some chai tea and they used it and they're like, well, this tastes terrible. It's it's all bitter and harsh. And like, did you use tea? Well, yeah. Did the recipe say to use tea? Well, no. So you're complaining at me about my recipe, but you didn't actually make my recipe. I made this completely different thing, but it's your fault. So I mean, I love those spices, those Indian type spices. I tend to think amber, malty type beers. Brown ale was one that I could brew quickly, but Vienna lager, like a beer, is something similar. Maybe even Oktoberfest, perhaps. I don't know that I have tried that particular combination in other beers, but I think I would go with malty beers because I wanted because there I use that to describe how do I put together a concept, and here I was trying to do something that reminded me of a chai tea latte at Starbucks or someplace, some coffee shop. And so a malty beer that's got a little bit of residual sweetness, not too much bitterness. I think in that style, because you wanna taste the spices, but the spices are, you know, what they call the warming spices. So they you know, if you're using them, they need some sweetness to balance that. Finally, if you're using those kind of spices, I would say be careful if you use clove, because you know, we all know that that's the same as you know, what gets produced by you know, wild yeast, and especially if you have it in a competition, judges might think your beer is infected. You know, they might not look at the list and say, "Oh, well, why?" I mean, I did that in my pumpkin beer. I had clove in my pumpkin beer because pumpkin pie spice includes cloves, and the judges were, you know, convinced themselves that my beer was infected. Like, well, it's more likely that my beer is infected or that it tastes like the ingredient that I said was in it. So Gordon's tip for competitions was, if your ingredient could reasonably be mistaken for a fault, leave it out. So
Noted.
out the clove so that they don't think your beer is infected. But no, I haven't. But I would think like amber and brown beers, not roasty beers, but malty beers, I think would work well with those spices.
Perfect. And taking the
Why the decrease in popularity of black IPA in the USA? Is that what that says?
Yeah.
take it.
What do I think in this respect? I don't know. Black IPA. When black IPA was popular, I said, you know, this is a fad. This is going to go away. No. Black IPA forever. Okay, here's the style, and then boom, everybody moved on to the next, you know, shiny object. So everybody's making hazy IPAs still, and I don't know. Some of the best black IPAs I've ever had have been in South America. Ironically, it's a style that seems to have stayed there, and you know, I'll give another Brazil example. Sorry, but I was in Porto Alegre, and we did this interesting workshop. We had 4 judges, and we had a sort of meet the brewer session where you're a brewer, you brought in your beer, and we see what it is, so it's not like it's judging, and we taste it, and you know, you come back and we talk about it, but you have the recipe. So we sit there with the recipe and the beer, and we talk about it, and we actually make recommendations based on that. And I had somebody bring me a black IPA there, and like, well, if this was in a competition, I would have given this a 45. You know, my only recommendation is like, don't change anything. Like, if the style tasted like this, they wouldn't have gone away. I think in the U.S., so to directly answer the question, perhaps, and this is an opinion, I think they went away because bitter, roasty beers, it can be a clashing flavor, and Americans can never leave well enough alone. We always try to make something bigger and bigger and more and more. You know how we are.
Yeah.
So, well, if your IPA is this bitter, mine's going to be twice as bitter. Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean it tastes better, especially if it's a black IPA, because the bitterness and the roast are clashing flavors. So you have to be very careful there. So some of the best black IPAs I've had in South America. So either you knew how to make them or you learned how to make them. I mean, maybe some of the suggestions that I've given at times have helped. I hope so. But those are reasonable. So, I mean, I would I would prefer to order a black IPA in South America more than I would prefer to order one in the US if I could find one.
Perfect.
Good job.
Thank you. And the last question that was related to the chai tea, more sort of, is have you used tea in a recipe, or just this mixture that reminds you the spices of the India? Or
I've only used the spices. I've never done the tea, because I see it says cold brew the tea, and I don't know if that. I don't know what flavors I would get out of that. I don't want the flavors from the tea. I just want the flavors of the spice.
Yeah.
So, if you like that, sure, use understand that you're going to put tannin in the beer. So maybe make the beer a little sweeter so that the tannin will bring it back into balance. I mean, sometimes teas are used in mead making as a source of tannin. So just understand that you're bringing those other characteristics, not just flavor. So I tended to use the spices, and I tended to make a tea out of them, so I could control exactly what was going in.
Perfect.
Says masala chai. I think masala just means mix.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, in the book, in the recipe, I mean, there's, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 different spices. I made it myself from the individual spices. Yeah, I mean, put together your own mix in some form that you like, but I make it up as a tea. You know, I crush the spices. I put them in a teapot, and I put boiling water on it for a couple of minutes, and then I strain it. And then I have this jar of liquid that I can then blend into the beer to get the level of taste that I want. And, you know, sometimes you have to do that, you know, several times. And sometimes you have to add individual spices later in the same way to get the balance you want. But I've never put tea in beer. No.
A little pause. Los que han hecho cerveza con té han sido los chicos, por ejemplo, de Intrinsical. Han hecho un par de cervezas colaborativas con té con Ergo y con un cervecero japonés. Así que sí, en algún momento encuentras en algún live a Ignacio Daneri, le podrías preguntar por qué ellos lo han utilizado, o a Daniel Moscoso de Ergo. There are 2 guys that use tea actually in a recipe, so he can ask them how they use them.
Oh, okay.
That was the tip. Well, I know that it's been a little bit longer than we expected with the trouble with the audio in the beginning. So let's wrap it up.
I'm talking to people from Chile. I never expect to be on time, so.
That hurts. But we were connected
but you know I'm right.
I know you're right, but this time we were on time, and the problem.
Yes. The problem was on my side. So.
Well, we all make the last question unrelated to beer, because we cannot talk about beer all the time. But we know that you like a lot of spirits. You have it in your heart. So, which cocktail, could be simple, could be fancier, do you recommend for this pandemic season?
Oh, wow. I wish you would have asked me that so I could think, because I have so many choices. The problem is here, it's hot. It's summer for me. So I want a Aperol Spritz or something.
Perfect.
You know, it's a little it's a little too warm for Negroni. Well, maybe not.
Negroni.
It's always good for Negroni, but
Yes.
like I tend to make cocktails in the summer that are a little lower in alcohol. The things that have some sparkling water in it of some sort, or you had mentioned before, I think, that you make what you call it a piston. So what is the ratio there? I should try that. I've got a lot of pisco, as a matter of fact.
Perfect.
So.
It's like 2.5 ounce, and completed with the tonic of your preference. And I recommend that you can use a lemon zest, and try to sprinkle a little bit of their oils in the rim of the glass.
So
and
you just do a twist, not the juice?
No, not the juice, because it tends to make them a little bit turbid, and it's not nice in the eye. So you can use the oils, and it's better.
It makes it look like a hazy IPA.
Yeah. So
well, I would like to try that. I mean, I love a pisco sour, but I can't get the right kind of limes. We don't have those here, and I don't want to use the wrong ones.
But the Piston is a really good choice. I like it a lot.
Yeah. So it's what time is it? It's almost 7 o'clock here. So
yes.
it might be a good time for me to go out and try to make one of those myself.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Gracias, José, que hizo la mayoría de la entrevista. Yo estaba más en el back office respondiendo algunas cosas. Y gracias a ustedes, chicos, por participar. Esta grabación va a ser subida al canal de YouTube de ACAS. Ya vamos a tratar de hacer lo posible por poder subirla subtitulada. Ya estamos trabajando en eso. Thanks a lot, Gordon, for your time. It's been really clarifying about a lot of aspects from the fruits and the spices in beer as well as mead. Gracias,
Everybody
José.
stay safe. Everybody stay safe, and I hope to get back down there soon. I miss seeing everyone in person and meeting people, and I always enjoy my visits to South America. So thank you for inviting me on your show, and hope you all had a good time.
Thanks.
Cheers.
To you, Gordon. Hope to see you soon.
Saludos.
Chicos, muchas gracias por participar. Así que vamos cerrando la entrevista. Gracias, José, por todo.
Sí, gracias a todos. Thank you, Gordon. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope you stay in good health and have a nice day.
Yeah, me too.
Bye.
Everyone wear a mask.
Yeah, please.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.